Hello there, and welcome back. Today, we are going to be talking about a number of different things, kind of coalescing into talking about the American musical. Um, you see, this is good old picture of Times Square. When we think about American theater, oftentimes we think about Broadway, even if we're not quite sure what that means. And when we think of Broadway, we think about musicals, right? Musical theater. So let's talk about the kind of different things that kind of came together in New York and in the musical kind of form, right, to create it what it was. All right. So in 1750, right, this is during English colonial days. These two New Yorkers, Thomas Keane and Walter Murray, they opened up a theater in New York City on Nassau Street, which could seat 280 people. Now, I'm going to be mentioning a number of different street names. It is not very important for you to know exactly, like on a map, where they are in relationship to each other, just to know that all of these streets are, within a 30-minute walk of each other in Lower Manhattan, right? And so they're very, very close. So this particular theater mostly showed Shakespeare and ballad operas. Now we know what Shakespeare is, um, and it was an incredibly popular. Well, Shakespeare was incredibly popular in the English-speaking world. It has been ever since Shakespeare wrote the things. But what are ballad operas? Now, ballad operas, they satirize opera, right? And opera being that very kind of thought of as highfalutin, vibrato, big, huge, elaborate costumes, Puccini, Wagner, Mozart kind of things. But those particular performances were more about the music, right? They were more vehicles for beautiful music rather than necessarily storytelling, right? Um, and so what ballad operas did is that they used music that was borrowed from popular culture rather than these big classical or baroque composers, and they used that music, put it in kind of an opera form to satirize upper class opera, and not just kind of the music and the conventions of it, but also kind of the moral, the virtue of the storytelling. Now, you might think then that ballad operas, the entertainment value of going to see a ballad opera was purely about watching them lampoon something else, right? Like a spoof, which wasn't really true. Even though they did have kind of reference to opera throughout these ballad operas. Much of the entertainment came actually from the music and story themselves and the accessibility, honestly, of a lot of these performances. Now, then again, these began in England as a way to kind of make fun of the style and over idealized virtue of, these Italian, French, and German operas. But they really came to be their own distinct art form. And the Park Theater, this huge, huge theater, was built in 1798 and could hold 2,000 theater goers. Now, uh, as one of the 13 original colonies from England, right? New York was somewhat more mercantile focused, right, than some of the other colonies. Um, there's a lot more trade going in and out of the various harbors in New York. And in that way, a lot of money was going through, a lot of different ideas went through New York. A lot of different kind of cultural, ethnic, religious groups kind of came in and kind of made New York kind of the notional melting pot, right, and that it is today. Um, but still, a lot of those communities holding on to their kind of distinct um, uh, 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 I don't know, kind of their distinct identities as well. Um, and so a lot of that kind of cultural churn and different kind of pollinations from different groups will develop Broadway into what it is. So the late 18th, mid 19th century, right? You kind of had the stratification of who saw what in American theater, right? Upper classes attended the opera because that's what you did. The middle classes went to ballad operas, and lower classes saw variety shows and vaudeville. Now, a variety show, it's um, a kind of performance, but it's not. It even really couldn't be called theater, right? In kind of the narrative that we're thinking, um, because uh, these variety shows where, you could see like a juggler, a contortionist, you could see a whole bunch of these different things, just kind of one after another. But there wouldn't be any kind of even hint of a connecting tissue other than they're just a whole bunch of individual discrete shows. Now, vaudeville came from France. It was kind of a comedic series of musical acts or singing and dancing, but in each one kind of had its own little story. But overall, it didn't have much of a connecting plot line. But at least kind of in terms of how they made the audience feel, right? There was an arc, even if you didn't have a plot line that was connecting them, right? Per se. And so you could see kind of the beginning of an entire musical show um, in vaudeville, where you had kind of a musical experience, if not kind of a musical narrative going throughout the whole thing. And we can't talk about American theater or musical theater without mentioning minstrel shows. Now, for those of you who do not know what a minstrel show is, it was super racist, white performers in blackface who were performing what they billed as authentic Black culture. And these were in blackface, these white performers performed, songs, skits, and uh, they what they thought were more accessible versions of popular plays. Um, Now, the there was this gentleman, his name was Thomas Rice, who was a blackface performer, a white guy, right? He invented the character of Jim Crow. And those kind of blackface caricatures of different um, ideas of who or of what enslaved Black Americans would be or how they would act kind of became a little bit of like an American form of commedia dell'arte, right, who are some of these different stock characters. Now, obviously, these were white people in blackface, and so they did not actually portray authentic Black culture at all. But the idea that they did made these performers very, very popular throughout the United States, especially actually in the North, where the white audiences had less kind of direct contact um, with um, with Black Americans, enslaved or free. Um, and so these different um, uh, uh, this minstrelsy kind of started as kind of comic um, uh, uh, mm, a comic little kind of skits in the middle of larger kind of acts of these other a little bit more proper or conventional plays, right? Almost as kind of a palate cleanser in the middle. But eventually they grew into their own thing. And again, it is arguably the first American-born art form. Now, I'm going to take a little bit of a detour talking about minstrel shows. I wanted to talk about the African Grove Theater. Now, this was a theater that opened in 1816 in New York City. There was a Black American, William Alexander Brown. He noticed, well, everyone noticed, that there were various kind of tea gardens in the city where white New Yorkers could go and drink tea and lemonade and sit and have conversation and listen to a poetry reading and that sort of thing. And he thought, hey, there's this market, right? Why don't I open one where Black New Yorkers were also welcome? And so he did. And after that, it was a very popular place. And he then attached a theater to it. It had to move from place to place because a lot of the neighbors where the African Grove Theater were complained about kind of the rowdy audiences in the African Grove Theater. Now, these were, again, primarily Black audiences, but the rowdiness per se of these audiences were, exactly the same as the rowdiness in white audiences. But, you know, uh, what was thought by the police to be just kind of boisterousness in a white audience felt threatening coming from a Black audience. And so it had to move. It was forced to move around and around. So it eventually landed on Mercer Street, which was relatively close to the Park Theater. Remember that 2,000 seat theater. Um, Now, the African Grove Theater presented, King Lear, Othello, but they also put on original works. The William Alexander Brown wrote a play called The Drama of King Shot Away. We unfortunately don't have that play, but it was the first production in the United States of a full-length play by a Black American playwright. Um, Now, eventually, right, because the African Grove Theater put on, Shakespeare, it ended up having to be next to the Park Theater, and it put on a production of Richard III at the same time that the Park Theater was putting on a production of Richard III, right? And Stephen Price, who was the owner of the Park Theater, hired a whole bunch of people to go into the African Grove Theater and essentially start a riot. And after the riot started, the police were called and decided to shut the theater down. And so uh, Stephen Price's uh, hiring of these goons to go shut down a competitor worked, unfortunately, because the police shut it down. And so this is just kind of a little tidbit about what the struggles were for American Black theater practitioners at the time. Now, this is a little poster. During the late 19th centuries, or during the late 19th century, there were a lot of class conflicts, right, in the United States, right? And this is a poster: "Working men, shall Americans or British rule in this city?" Now, keep in mind, this is New York. "The crew of the British steamer have threatened all Americans who shall dare to express their opinions this night at the English Aristocratic Opera House." Wow, they are really linking opera to being high class and English. "We advocate no violence, but a free expression of opinion to all public men. Working men, free men, stand by your lawful rights." Okay, so this was a poster that went up. There was a rivalry, you could say, between two actors, an American actor, Edwin Forrest, and a British actor, William Macready, right? And at the Astor Place Theater, right, named for the bajillionaire Astor family, supporters of these two. What they would do is they would go around the country, and one would do, a tour performing themselves as, let's say, Richard III, right? And then the other one would tour right after them, performing the same thing. And you could kind of think of this riot that was caused by these two rival actors not as necessarily being only about, right, oh, I'm a fan of this actor, you're a fan of that actor, and we're going to fight and kill each other over it. No, it did absolutely have that kind of class um, connotations to it. You can imagine something similar, like if I were to mention the two baseball teams in Chicago, right? The Chicago Cubs and the Chicago White Sox, right? If you had a riot, a big fight break out between Chicago Cubs fans and Chicago White Sox fans, you would not necessarily think that it was only about which baseball team, right? Because the Chicago Cubs represent, more North Side, more wealthy, and the White Sox represent a little bit more South Side, a little bit more working class, and a little less white, and a little more black as well. And so these two actors, Edwin Forrest and William Macready, their kind of rivalry sparked this big riot. 22 to 31 people dead outside of a theater, 120 people injured. But after this, theaters became less segregated along class lines. I also want to talk a little bit about the Yiddish theater, because that was also important in New York. Professional and semi-professional plays and operettas put on by Jewish people in Yiddish. And it started out in Romania, actually, this kind of Yiddish theater. It went to, for various reasons, the heart of Yiddish theater went to Poland and then to Russia. And then because of good old, unfortunately common anti-Semitism, they were forced to leave Russia and eventually kind of landed in New York. So if we remember way back toward the beginning of the semester, whereas mainstream quote unquote. Western theater came out of church passion plays, after the fall of the Roman Empire. Obviously, if they were Christian church passion plays, Jewish people didn't really see those for one, the religious reason, but often they had a lot of anti-Semitic elements anyway. And because anti-Semitism has been around in Europe for a very long time, and Jewish people were prevented from being able to put down as strong of national roots as non-Jewish people, it was kind of inevitable for Yiddish theater to develop kind of as its own thing, distinct from different national theaters as well. I read the Museum of Yiddish Theater said, music was the only performing art for which Jews could boast of having skilled personnel. Music also provoked the least protest because of its non-representational character. So it made sense for Yiddish theater to always have kind of a musical backbone to it, right? And it kind of found a home in kind of the Jewish section of New York, Lower East Side, kind of Second Avenue. And this Second Avenue Yiddish theater came to almost rival Broadway in terms of tickets sold in the early 20th century, right? But again, this is another strain of theater that had a very strong kind of musical backbone to it. Let me get to this fellow. So Florence Ziegfeld, 1867 to 1932, he created this vaudeville act that decided to bring musical entertainment to the masses via cheaper ticket prices and national tours. And so he put on this this big vaudeville act from 1907 to 1936 called Ziegfeld Follies, and it toured the whole United States. And it was a big hit. Right? One of his first major stars was Fanny Brice, this vaudeville act. And then, because this kind of musical thing was so popular, in 1927, this is the birth of the book musical. Now, a book musical is what we today think of as a musical, right? It is where a musical where songs and dances are fully integrated into a well-made story with serious dramatic goals that's able to evoke genuine emotions rather or other than laughter, right? So this is a musical show that everything is stitched together in equal measure to create a one kind of coherent play with dancing and music into it that's not just supposed to be funny or lampooning or cause entertainment, but has serious dramatic goals. So the first one was Hammerstein and Kern's Showboat, again, produced by Ziegfeld in 1927. And that particular show followed the lives of stagehands, performers, and workers on the Mississippi River showboat, the Cotton Blossom. And there were themes of racial prejudice, and tragic love. Song Old Man River, if you know that song, comes from this particular musical. And then after that, it was successful, and we are off to the races, right? Iteration after iteration of these popular musicals came on Broadway and toured throughout the country. Oklahoma, South Pacific are, the Three Penny Opera, which is the first commercially successful off-Broadway musical written by Brecht, right? West Side Story, an adaptation of Romeo and Juliet, Fiddler on the Roof, Cabaret, right? And even passed into a little bit more modern times, Hair, A Chorus Line, Les Mis, Beauty and the Beast, Rent, Wicked, Book of Mormon, Hamilton, Come From Away, right? These various musicals just kind of took off and iterated upon each other, and even until the current day, right? These are all still the same kind of basic art form, informed definitely by other theatrical movements, certainly, but it is still a musical play where songs and dances are fully integrated into a well-made story with serious dramatic goals that is able to evoke genuine emotions other than laughter, right? And so that is where I'm going to leave you today. That's kind of where the American musical came from. Thank you all very much. I will see you next time.